throb pulsed behind Leo's eyes, a dull, rhythmic hammering in the empty silence of the classroom. He glanced at the wall clock. The hands were closing in on midnight. A sudden, cold dread seized him. He bolted from the room, the hallway a streaking blur as he burst through the heavy door leading to the roof of the science building. And there he was, Ethan, standing near the ledge, a solitary figure against the star-dusted sky. Leo's fingers tightened around the crumpled note in his pocket. He called out, his voice raw and breathless. Ethan stopped, his movement hesitant, before turning to face him. The campus lights below cast long, distorted shadows. Leo, running with frantic energy, didn't slow down in time and collided with him. A strong arm wrapped around him, a reflexive, steadying gesture that pulled him into a brief, fragile embrace. Once Leo found his footing, Ethan released him with a measured distance, an eyebrow raised in mild surprise. He asked why Leo was running so recklessly. Leo, still gasping for air, demanded to know what he was doing up here. Ethan's expression was placid, a mask of unnerving calm. But Leo knew. He knew that if he hadn't appeared, Ethan's next step would have been into the empty air. He had witnessed that fall too many times, a recurring nightmare etched into his memory. He was trapped in a loop, reliving the day of Ethan's suicide, failing every time to prevent it. Until now, when he'd woken up again in the classroom, he saw the note on his desk. Ethan's elegant script confessed a secret affection, something Leo had never suspected. He couldn't help but stare up at him now, at his lanky frame silhouetted by the faint glow of the city. His dark, impenetrable eyes watched Leo with a quiet intensity. Leo extended his hand, the folded paper held between his fingers, and asked if he wasn't owed a response. Ethan's composure didn't falter, but the knuckles of his hand whitened as his fingers clenched into a fist. Leo muttered under his breath that Ethan hadn't even given him a chance to say yes or no. After a few seconds of charged silence, a slight tremor entered Ethan's voice as he questioned what Leo meant. Leo pressed his lips together and stated plainly that he was saying yes. Ethan pressed him, asking him to clarify what he was agreeing to. Leo explained it was to the letter he had written. Still, Ethan pushed, his stubbornness a frustrating wall as he demanded to know what the letter said. Leo finally met his gaze, his teeth gritted, and enunciated each word with forced clarity. It was a confession. Leo had accepted his confession. He asked if that meant they were boyfriends now, and after a beat, confirmed that they were. A slow smile spread across Ethan's lips, transforming his face. His entire body seemed to unclench, and two small dimples appeared on his cheeks, lending him an unexpectedly boyish charm. There was no trace of the profound despair that could drive a person to the edge. Leo glanced over Ethan's shoulder at the low parapet behind him, a residual fear chilling him. He grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him away from the ledge, declaring that they should be on a date, not lingering here. Ethan followed him obediently toward the door, his curiosity evident as he inquired where they might go. Leo told him not to worry, that he had it all figured out. As he strode forward with a confidence he didn't feel, he missed the thoughtful, lingering look Ethan cast back at the empty rooftop. His bravado was a thin veneer over a complete lack of experience. He fumbled with his phone, typing a desperate message into a group chat named the Wolfpack. He sent an SOS, explaining that he was on a first date and needed ideas. Fast. His friend Chris immediately replied, questioning if Leo was actually in a relationship. Leo confirmed it was urgent. Another friend, Ryan, sent a link to a definitive first date guide. Leo sent a quick thanks before closing the app, ignoring the flurry of follow-up questions. 5 minutes later, he stood silently before a cozy, dimly lit Italian restaurant called The Grotto, feeling a wave of uncertainty. Ethan chuckled beside him, asking if this was really his kind of place. Leo shot him a sharp look, and Ethan wisely fell silent. Leo retorted defensively that yes, it was exactly his kind of place. Ethan shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips, and conceded that it seemed nice. He added quietly that anywhere would be fine, as long as he was eating with Leo. A warmth spread across Leo's face. He sized Ethan up, surprised that this quiet, reserved man could be so disarmingly earnest. After they finished their pasta, Leo announced it was time to head back to the dorms. Ethan hesitated, refusing to move. Leo asked what was wrong. Ethan looked at him, his expression serious, and wondered if Leo's past dates had really consisted of nothing more than a single meal. Leo faltered for a moment, then, refusing to admit defeat, turned and marched them toward the multiplex cinema down the street. Standing before the glowing marquee, Leo was overwhelmed by the choices. Ethan pointed to the premium theater option, the one with the plush, two-person reclining love seats. When Leo questioned his choice, Ethan responded with perfect seriousness, asking if they weren't, in fact, a couple. The ticket agent glanced between them, a knowing smirk barely contained. Mortified, Leo covered his face and muttered to the agent to just give him 2 tickets for the VIP section. Once they were settled in the darkened theater, Ethan was visibly suppressing a laugh. The moment Leo looked at him, his face became a picture of innocence. Leo tapped the armrest between them, stating that they were going back as soon as the movie was over. Ethan nodded agreeably, but after a few minutes, he tentatively reached his hand out, extending it into the space between them. Leo asked in a low voice what he was doing. Ethan whispered back that he wanted to hold his hand. Leo hesitated. Ethan's expression immediately became crestfallen, and he straightened up as if to leave. Leo quickly grabbed his arm, demanding to know where he was going. Ethan murmured that he just needed some air. With a sigh of resignation, Leo took his hand and told him to sit down. A flash of cunning glinted in Ethan's eyes. Leo narrowed his, wondering if he was being manipulated. Ethan met his gaze with wide-eyed innocence, asking what he could possibly mean. His look was so genuine that Leo let it drop, pulling him back into the seat. Ethan's palm was warm, a strange current seeming to pass between them that made Leo's heart beat erratically. He instinctively tried to pull away, but Ethan's grip tightened, a gentle but firm refusal. Leo stopped struggling, suddenly hyper-aware of the accelerated rhythm in his chest. Back in the dorm room, Chris immediately cornered him, asking if it was true he was in a relationship. Leo nodded. Chris fired off a series of questions about who she was, what her major was, and why it was so sudden. Leo ignored him and turned to Ryan, telling him to hold out his hand. Ryan complied, confused, and Leo took it. Ryan frowned, asking what he was doing. Leo held it for a moment, feeling nothing, no unusual spark. He wondered why it was so different with Ethan. Ryan pulled his hand back, reminding Leo that his girlfriend would get jealous. Chris stepped between them, scoffing that there was nothing to get worked up about since Leo wasn't into guys. Ryan gave Chris a peculiar look, remarking that one could never be too sure. Feeling bewildered, Leo washed up and climbed into his bunk, pulling the covers over his head. He heard Chris ask again, his voice insistent, confirming that Leo didn't like men. Leo, irritated, mumbled from under the blanket that he didn't know. The next morning, Leo went downstairs and found Ethan waiting by the entrance, holding a coffee and a paper bag. As Ethan approached, Chris appeared, his tone unfriendly as he asked what he was doing there and if they were friends now. Unfazed, Ethan reached behind his back and produced a single, vibrant red rose, offering it to Leo. He explained that their first day had felt rushed, and he had heard that relationships were supposed to begin with flowers. Chris stared at Leo, his eyes wide with disbelief, demanding to know what Ethan meant by relationship. Ethan blinked, turning to Leo, and asked if he hadn't told his friends yet. Leo closed his eyes, admitting he hadn't had the chance. Ethan then looked directly at Chris, his voice calm and factual, and stated that he and Leo had gotten together the previous evening. He paused, then added for clarity that they were a couple now. Leo lunged forward and clapped a hand over Ethan's mouth, hissing at him to be quiet in front of so many people. Ethan, looking puzzled, gently pulled Leo's hand away and asked what was wrong with being together. Leo grabbed his arm and started running, dragging him away from the dorm. As they ran, he whispered that yes, they were together, but he didn't have to announce it to the entire campus. Ethan, still not quite understanding, obediently lowered his voice and said he understood. Ethan, now operating under his official boyfriend status, insisted they sit together in their American history lecture. The professor, accustomed to seeing Ethan in the front row, expressed surprise at his new seat in the back. Ethan smiled and began to explain that it was because he wanted to be with his boyfriend. Leo swiftly grabbed his hand under the desk and squeezed it hard, giving him a glare. Ethan coughed and corrected himself, lamely claiming that a friend had told him he should experience the lecture from different perspectives. Throughout the class, Ethan quietly played with Leo's hand, comparing the size of their palms. Leo watched him, a question forming in his mind. He wondered why someone like Ethan, who was so handsome and seemed to have a decent personality, would be interested in him. He tore a corner from his notebook, scribbled a question, and passed it over. He asked why Ethan liked him. Ethan read it, then simply continued to hold his hand, picking up a pen with his left and writing 2 words in reply. "It's a secret." Annoyed, Leo tried to pull his hand away, but Ethan held fast. He tugged gently until Leo turned back to him, then showed him another note he had written. It asked if he could kiss him. Leo's face flushed. He angrily scrawled a single word in reply, "Dream on." Ethan studied it for a long moment before writing again. He said that in that case, he thought he might need to go to the rooftop for some air after class. Leo glared at him, furious. He knew Ethan was doing it on purpose. After a tense minute, he reluctantly wrote back, telling him to meet in the music practice room on the 3rd floor after the lecture. Ethan carefully folded the note and put it in his pocket, a triumphant smile revealing his dimples. The hallway was empty during the break between classes. Leo used his student key card to unlock a practice room. He pushed Ethan inside and shut the door. The heavy curtains were drawn, but a sliver of sunlight cut through the dusty air. His heart was pounding. Trying to seem casual, he slapped a hand on the grand piano and told Ethan to sit on the bench. Ethan did so without a word, his dark, rich eyes looking up at Leo. Leo stood over him, his voice a little unsteady as he commanded him to look up. Ethan's long lashes fluttered as he tilted his head back, the beam of sunlight catching the moisture in his eyes. A war raged inside Leo. He stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. Then, in a sudden movement, Ethan stood, wrapped his arms around Leo's waist, and pressed him back against the piano. A shadow fell across Leo's face. Ethan's voice was a hoarse whisper as he told him to close his eyes. When Leo opened his again, the usual serenity in Ethan's gaze was replaced by a turbulent, dark current that made him want to look away. A wave of heat rushed through his body, something primal and uncontrollable. Ethan's hands were balled into tight fists at his sides, the veins on their backs standing out in sharp relief, a testament to his immense restraint. The silence in the large room was broken only by the sound of Ethan's ragged breathing. The sound made Leo's face burn. He managed to whisper that it was okay, that it was time for their next class. He turned and fled the room. When he got back to the lecture hall, Chris was waiting. He asked where Leo had disappeared to. Leo turned to face him, and Chris froze, staring at him for a long moment before swallowing hard. Leo frowned, asking what his problem was. Chris coughed, averting his eyes, and said it was nothing. He was just wondering where he'd been. Annoyed, Leo snapped that it was none of his business and told him to go back to his seat. Chris didn't move, protesting that they always sat together. A shadow fell over them. Ethan's cool voice came from above, stating that this was his seat now. Hearing his voice, Leo felt a fresh wave of shame and buried his face in his arms, refusing to look at either of them. The harsh scrape of a chair on the floor was followed by Chris's indignant voice, questioning since when this was Ethan's seat. The area around them grew quiet. Chris and Ethan had never interacted before. They had nothing in common. Leo was confused by Chris's sudden hostility. He felt it wasn't his place to intervene, and a deep discomfort settled in his stomach. He just wanted to be away from Ethan, so he kept his head down, pretending he couldn't hear. After a beat, Ethan spoke with unwavering confidence, beginning to say it was because he and Leo were. Leo shot up from his seat, pushed Chris out of the way, and pulled Ethan down beside him. He quickly explained to Chris that he and Ethan had something important to discuss. As Ethan sat, a smirk played on his lips. Chris stomped to the row in front of them, frequently glancing back with a sour expression. Leo turned to Ethan and, on impulse, reached out and poked one of his dimples. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. He asked if this wasn't more convenient. Leo snatched his hand back as if burned, asking what was more convenient. Ethan continued, a teasing light in his eyes, remarking that Leo seemed to really like his dimples. In the confined space, their faces were inches apart. Leo could see his own reflection in Ethan's pupils. He held his breath. Ethan blinked, adding innocently that Leo had stared at them the other day and had just touched them again. He accused him of wanting to eat but refusing to admit it. Leo was stunned by this new, playful side of Ethan, so different from the cold, reserved person he had once been. Flustered, Leo pushed him away, telling him to just sit up straight. Before Ethan could, the professor's voice boomed across the hall. He called out both their names, announcing that his patience had run out. He demanded to know what they had been mumbling about for the entire lecture. The entire class turned to look at them. Leo wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Standing in the hallway outside the classroom, a punishment he hadn't experienced since middle school, he glared at an impassive Ethan. He seethed that this was all his fault. Ethan questioned why it was his fault, pointing out that they were both talking. Leo retorted that it was because Ethan was the professor's star student, which only made him angrier. Ethan offered a sincere apology, but then his eyes brightened. He admitted that he just couldn't help it, he was too happy. Leo sighed, utterly defeated. Ethan seemed to have recently discovered a talent for getting under Leo's skin, particularly with a feigned, pitiful expression that Leo found impossible to resist. During a basketball scrimmage, he showed up with a bottle of Gatorade, his eyes full of a hopeful, pleading look. He said that it was a nice day, and he just wanted to give his boyfriend what other guys had. The unspoken grievance in his gaze was so potent that Leo caved instantly. He looked across the court, where the girlfriend of one of his teammates was waiting patiently on the sidelines. And then, standing among a group of cheering girls, was the solitary, unexpected figure of Ethan. Leo couldn't suppress a laugh. Chris jogged over and slapped his back, asking what was so funny. Leo pointed at Ethan, saying he was laughing at him. Chris's tone was sour as he commented that Leo must find him ridiculous. Leo looked at him, puzzled. He corrected him, saying he thought Ethan was adorable, and asked if Chris didn't agree. Just then, Ethan saw him pointing and broke into a wide, happy grin, waving. Leo's own smile broadened. He looked like a big, goofy golden retriever. It was incredibly endearing. Chris's expression shifted. He observed that just 2 days ago, Leo had claimed he was only dating Ethan out of necessity. But now, Chris continued, it looked like he was genuinely falling for him. The words hit Leo with the force of a physical blow. His smile vanished. He turned his head away, his body stiff. That was a good question. Why did seeing Ethan make him want to smile now? Why did he suddenly find him so well-behaved and cute? He took a deep breath, telling himself to calm down, that this was all just a means to an end, a way to break the cycle and get his normal life back. He was a guy. Ethan was a guy. There was nothing cute about it. He composed himself for 30 seconds, then turned back to look at Ethan, who was still waving, his smile unwavering. Leo's resolve crumbled. He couldn't calm down. It was just too damned cute. He looked at Chris with grave seriousness and placed a hand on his shoulder. He announced that Chris might be right, he might actually be gay. He corrected himself, saying there was no might about it. Chris looked confused, asking what he meant. Losing his patience, Leo roared. Is there something wrong with your ears, Chris? I said I'm gay. I think I like guys. His declaration echoed across the basketball court, rendering him instantly famous. From that day on, the flow of love letters from girls in his locker ceased entirely. Later, in the dorm, he clung to Ryan, crying theatrically. He wailed that his life was over, that he could never show his face in public again, and it was all Chris's fault. Chris stood by, arms crossed, stating that he had nothing to do with it. Ryan patted Leo's back absent-mindedly, telling him to stop crying and mentioning that his girlfriend, Chloe, had asked when they were all going to get dinner with Ethan. Leo immediately sat up, wiping away non-existent tears, and said that Saturday would work. It was an unspoken rule among their group that any new significant other had to be officially introduced over a meal. Composing himself, he stepped into the hallway to call Ethan. The phone was answered on the second ring. Ethan's voice was bright, laced with an unstoppable happiness that seemed to have been present ever since Leo had agreed to be with him. Even though Leo had just publicly humiliated himself, hearing that cheerful voice made him feel a pang of something warm. He cleared his throat and tried to sound nonchalant, informing Ethan that he was taking him to meet his friends for dinner on Saturday. Ethan chuckled, knowingly remarking that Leo wanted to make their relationship public. The late-night quiet of the dorm hallway amplified his voice through the phone, and the sound sent a pleasant shiver down Leo's spine. He snapped at him to stop learning such ridiculous phrases and hung up. When he turned around, Ryan and Chris were watching him silently. Ryan's eyes twinkled with amusement as he noted that Leo's way of yelling at people now sounded suspiciously like flirting. He teased that it was no wonder he had confessed his feelings in front of the whole team. Chris's expression was unreadable. He turned without a word and climbed into his bunk. Confused, Leo pointed at his back and silently mouthed to Ryan, asking what was wrong with him. Ryan glanced over and shrugged, suggesting it might be jealousy. Jealousy? Leo mused. That made a strange kind of sense. Among their small circle, Chris was the only one still single. The sizzling platter of fajitas was placed in the center of the table at the loud Tex-Mex restaurant. Leo was too busy eating to talk. Ethan, sitting beside him, was quietly assembling a tortilla for him. The table was quiet save for the sounds of the bustling restaurant. Chloe, Ryan's girlfriend, finally kicked her boyfriend under the table, prompting him to speak. Ryan cleared his throat and called Leo's name, telling him to say something. Leo finally looked up from his plate and put down his fork. He smiled and gestured to the man beside him, formally introducing his boyfriend, Ethan. Chloe beamed and winked at Leo, complimenting him on his excellent taste in handsome men. Ethan smiled shyly, countering that it was he who had good taste. The comment made Chloe squeal with delight, and she started slapping Ryan's thigh in her excitement. Ryan's face turned a shade of purple as he begged her to slap her own leg if she was that thrilled. Leo covered his face with his hands, but couldn't resist peeking through his fingers. He met a pair of smiling eyes staring directly at him. It was an unfairly charming look. He covered his face again. Ethan reached over and gently pulled his hands away, leaning close to his ear and whispering that it was all right. He wouldn't say another word. Halfway through the meal, Chloe suddenly asked Ethan if he had any friends he wanted to bring along. Ethan's demeanor changed instantly. He forced a smile but said nothing, his fingers clenching into a tight knot under the table, his knuckles turning white. Leo discreetly moved his own hand down and slowly, carefully, pried Ethan's fingers open, lacing them with his own. He answered for him, explaining that this was Ethan's first relationship, so he was still getting used to things, and that they would all get to know each other better later. Ethan turned to look at him. Their eyes met for a brief, intense moment before Ethan silently lowered his gaze. On the walk back to campus after dinner, Ethan was stopped by someone he seemed to know. Leo stood a short distance away watching them talk. The other person kept glancing in his direction. As they moved closer, an uneasy feeling began to creep over Leo. When their conversation ended, Ethan looked up at him, and there was a shattered, broken light in his eyes. A sense of foreboding washed over Leo, and he strode toward them, catching only the last few words from the other guy. "You need to think about this carefully." Leo looked at the stranger, then back at Ethan, and asked who he was. Ethan avoided his gaze, mumbling that he was a friend from a long time ago. Leo frowned, repeating the words. He reminded Ethan that he had once claimed he didn't need any friends. Ethan opened his mouth as if to explain, but ultimately said nothing. Frustrated, Leo turned and walked away. Ethan followed hesitantly. When they reached the entrance to Leo's dorm, Ethan stood there, looking at him, waiting. Leo felt a knot of irritation tighten in his stomach. He didn't want to be the one to speak first. Ethan's continued silence only made him more upset. After all, he had no problem talking when he wanted a kiss or a hug. He grumbled that he was going up and told Ethan to go home. Without waiting for a response, he turned and went inside. From a window in the stairwell, he watched Ethan's figure below. Ethan, who had opted for off-campus housing since freshman year, stood there for a long time before finally turning to leave. Watching his retreating back, Leo felt an unexpected pang of loneliness and regret. But then he remembered the phrase a friend from a long time ago, and his thoughts drifted back to the beginning of the school year. The anger returned. When he'd first arrived on campus, he had quickly become friends with Ryan and Chris. He was naturally social and was often surrounded by a large group of people. Ethan was the opposite. He was always alone. Leo, feeling a bit sorry for him, had decided to make a grand gesture of friendship. He had approached him in the dining hall, his hand outstretched with a broad smile. He'd introduced himself, and Ethan had looked up at him with those cool, detached eyes and said he knew who he was. Leo had shot a triumphant look at Chris, who had bet him that Ethan wouldn't even know his name. Leo's smile had widened as he suggested they hang out sometime. But his smile had frozen on his face when Ethan had coldly replied that he was sorry, but he didn't need friends, before walking past him with his tray. After that public rejection, Leo had avoided him at all costs. He had assumed Ethan genuinely wanted to be alone. And now, today, he was being told that Ethan had friends after all. In the days that followed, a rift grew between them. Leo stopped sitting with him in class, avoided him at meals, and refused the Gatorade he brought to practice. Ethan silently accepted the distance, almost as if he were used to it. He even began to actively avoid Leo in return. But Leo wasn't used to it. He was used to Ethan's quiet presence, to him taking notes beside him, to him eating the vegetables he picked out of his food, to turning around after scoring a basket and seeing him on the sidelines. His mood soured. Ryan noticed, but Chris seemed to relish the change, slinging an arm around Leo's shoulders and declaring that it was great. Just like old times, just the three of them. Leo pulled out his phone. Not a single message from Ethan. He cursed him under his breath. Was this some kind of silent treatment competition? He shoved his phone in his pocket and looked up, only to see Ethan standing a short distance away, his gaze fixed on Chris's arm around his neck. When Ethan saw Leo looking, his eyes flickered away. Leo let out a cold snort and walked right past him. He couldn't believe it. Ethan hadn't said a word, just pretended not to see him. So typical. Get what you want and then stop caring. Then he paused. Was he including himself in that generalization? No, he was different. Later that night, still stewing in his dorm room and staring at a blank phone screen, he decided he needed some air. As he stepped outside, he saw a familiar figure standing under the lamppost. It was Ethan's so-called former friend. Leo tried to walk past without acknowledging him, but the guy stepped forward to block his path. Leo looked at him, his expression bored, and asked what he wanted. The guy smiled and suggested they talk at the campus coffee shop. Leo replied with a humorless smile of his own, pointing out that they didn't know each other. The guy's smile didn't falter. He said he knew Leo, Ethan's friend, and that he'd seen them at dinner together. Inside the sterile coffee shop, he held up his phone and asked if Leo wanted to know what he'd said to Ethan that night. Leo replied harshly that he wasn't interested. The guy persisted, asking if he wasn't curious why Ethan was now pushing him away. There was a strange, taunting quality to his voice. Leo said that if he wanted to know, he would ask Ethan himself because he trusted him. The guy sneered, saying that Ethan would never tell him, that he was afraid Leo would find him disgusting. Leo slammed his coffee cup down on the table, his eyes flashing with anger, and told him to watch his mouth. The guy leaned closer, a smug look on his face. He remarked that Leo must really like him and hoped he would continue to feel that way. Then he pressed play on his phone. A tinny, recorded voice filled the space. It was the conversation from the other night. The guy asked Ethan if he had a new friend now. Ethan told him it was none of his business. The guy laughed, saying that Ethan had found someone new and forgotten his old friends. Then his voice turned venomous. He asked if Ethan's new friend knew he was a pervert who liked men. He asked if he knew how long he'd been that way. He wondered if Leo would still be so friendly if he knew about Ethan's family. He taunted him for suddenly having so many friends. After a pause, Ethan's panicked voice came through, begging him not to tell Leo. The guy's voice was triumphant as he told Ethan that if he wanted his secret kept, he had to stay away from them. The recording ended with the final line Leo had overheard. "You need to think about this carefully." Leo stared at him, confused. The guy looked at him with amusement and offered to explain. He told Leo that he and Ethan had been friends when they were kids. Ethan had known from a young age that he was different, that he liked boys, but he had hidden it. One day, Ethan's mother found out. She had screamed at him, and then, whenever his friends came over to play, she would tell them all that her son was sick, that he was disgusting. And as kids, they believed what the adults told them. From that day on, Ethan had no friends. And this guy, his supposed best friend, had stood in front of everyone and called him a pervert, a freak with bad intentions. Ethan never tried to make friends again, because he knew his mother would just scare them all away. Everyone who left looked at him like he was contagious. The guy leaned back, his story finished, and asked with certainty, "So, do you still want to be friends with a pervert who likes men?" Leo looked at him, a funny, cold expression on his face, and asked why he was suddenly telling him all of this. He replied that it was because Ethan wasn't listening to him. He had explicitly told him to stay away from Leo, but he had seen him looking at a photo of Leo on his phone. He sneered that Ethan deserved whatever happened to him. Leo spoke calmly. He informed the guy that he also liked men. The guy's smug expression vanished, replaced by a blank stare. He stammered that it was impossible. Leo asked why it was so impossible, adding that it wasn't a big deal. He told him he was ignorant and should probably go online and see how common it was. Then he laughed, a short, bitter sound. He said that Ethan was an idiot for letting this guy's words scare him away. Then he stood up. "Oh, and by the way," he added, "I'm not his friend. I'm his boyfriend." He was desperate to see Ethan now and had no more time to waste on this person. As he walked out, he paused at the door and looked back. He said quietly, "You know, this all just makes you look incredibly jealous." He dialed Ethan's number as he walked, but it went straight to voicemail. The afternoon sun was bright, but a cold panic was spreading through his chest. Suddenly, a sharp, digital chime, an error sound he hadn't heard in a long time, echoed in his mind. Time loop initiating. His brain went numb for a second. Then he started to run. He sprinted back toward campus, the familiar scene replaying before his eyes. The campus counselor rushed past him, her face a mask of distress. He didn't need to look up at the science building. He could already see Ethan's silhouette against the sky. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, and burst onto the roof. The counselor was on the ground, gasping for breath, pleading with Ethan. Everyone's head turned to look at Leo. Ethan, standing precariously on the ledge, turned too. He blinked slowly, a flicker of confusion in his eyes as to why Leo was there. Leo's heart ached. The sour sting of tears pricked his eyes. Ethan was seen as such a good, quiet person by everyone, yet he carried this awful past. He couldn't imagine how many years he had spent in that lonely hell. And Leo had been so angry with him. He had been so wrapped up in the frustration of the loop, but in that moment he was grateful for it. It had led him here to this truth. He called Ethan's name, his voice trembling. Ethan looked at him, his own eyes red-rimmed, and tried to sound casual. He asked what Leo was doing up there. Leo ignored the question and said something completely different. He told Ethan he had just seen his old friend. Ethan tensed, his palms, which Leo could see were sweating even from this distance, slicked the ledge. Leo's voice cracked as he pretended to be hurt. He said that the guy had yelled at him. Ethan's confusion instantly morphed into anger. He demanded to know why. Leo looked at the horrified faces of the staff around them, closed his eyes, and threw all caution to the wind. He shouted that it was because he told the guy he liked Ethan that he was his boyfriend, and the guy had called him a pervert. He yelled that the names he'd been called were awful. He looked straight at the man on the ledge and asked, his voice breaking, "Ethan, do you think I'm a pervert?" Through the howling wind on the rooftop, he heard Ethan's trembling voice reply, "You're not." Leo finally let out a choked laugh. Ethan stared at him for a long time, and then a small dimple appeared on his cheek. A wave of relief washed over Leo. He stretched out his hand. "Then neither are you." Ethan slowly stepped down from the ledge and took his hand. Later, lying side by side in Ethan's sparse off-campus apartment, Leo asked if he had ever resented his mother. Ethan, nestled beside him, shook his head. He said he had never complained, that he understood why she was the way she was. Leo turned to him and asked why. Ethan explained that his father, who had clearly been in love with men, had deceived his mother into marrying him anyway. The unspoken tragedy of that statement hung in the air between them. Ethan's mood visibly dropped. Leo stroked his hair, trying to offer some comfort. He told him that it still wasn't an excuse for what she did to him, that he hadn't done anything wrong. There was nothing wrong with liking boys. The only thing wrong was being a coward who dragged an innocent person into their mess. On the day Leo was scheduled to move back into the dorms for the new semester, he discovered that the empty fourth bunk in their room was being filled by Ethan. He looked at him, speechless. He asked why he had bothered with off-campus housing in the first place, making it so difficult to coordinate for every single dorm activity, when they had always been a trio. Ethan just offered him an apologetic smile.